So this is a review for The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos, released in 1937. It's the 185th in the series, and it's directed by Frank Tashlin. You can find this beautiful restoration on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 3 DVD set. I have a link below to that set. Hopefully one day a HD version will show up. My prediction, it's going to show up on some sort of a Warner Archive release of some movie around that time. And you won't find this on YouTube as it is a copyrighted cartoon, so unless Warner Brothers themselves decide to release it, you're just not going to see it here. But in case you haven't seen this one deals with a very obscure topic, and we'll go through that in a moment, but essentially, forest animals, they participate in the Woodland Community Swing variety show on the radio station KUKU, in a parody of the radio show Community Sings, so we'll definitely go through those references in just a moment. So a few things about this review. Normally I'd add the original commentary, but in this case it'd be completely redundant, so I'm going to start this one from scratch. So I'm going to go through the short and all of the references, and some of the references I won't go too in-depth because certain references are covered more in-depth in other reviews, and it makes more sense just to gloss over them here. But some of the more obscure parts of this short will definitely cover. And because the music is so intertwined with a lot of the references, my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, he's recorded his Manny's Music Time segment, but I'm going to this time round put it all throughout the review as opposed to doing it in one whole section. I feel it makes more sense that way. Also, my good friend Austin Kelly, the self-proclaimed Tashlin-holic, as he's covered all of the Frank Tashlin shorts on this channel, he's going to add his thoughts too, so I'll add that here as well. So hopefully you guys will enjoy the different way I've edited this one, but let's get Manny on board. Say hi, Manny.
Hi, everyone. This is Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor. It's time for Toonie Tenor, Tenor, Tenor. It's time for Toonie Tenor, and my heart is full of love. Yes, it's time for Manny's Music Time with music trivia for you today. Bum. For the 1937 Merry Melody cartoon, The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos, directed by my fellow Jersey boy Frank Tashlin, with musical direction by Carl Stalling. So I'm jumping ahead in the whole Manny's Music Time gimmick once again. I'm currently in 1935, but Anthony is also working on the shorts of Frank Tashlin, and this is technically a Merry Melody from the 30s, so this is part of the Manny's Music Time, but, jumped ahead a bit. And I have a soft spot for this cartoon. So I first saw this one back sometime in the early 2000s on Cartoon Network, and there's just something about it that I enjoy. I think it's the music and the way that the characters are drawn, and I don't know. I've always had a soft spot for this particular cartoon, so I'm happy to come to this one, even though it is very, very, very obscure. A lot of the caricatures in this cartoon have faded in time, but it also provided a great opportunity for me to learn a lot about some of the caricatures that I knew about and some that I really did not know much about.
So as Manny already mentioned, this is very obscure, and so many references in this one are completely lost to time, and even doing this review, looking into some of these caricatures more in depth, a lot of things I didn't know, certainly, and some of it's actually very, very interesting. So I do encourage you, after watching this review, to actually look up some of these figures, because if I was to go through every single figure in depth, this would be like maybe a 5 or 10 hour video or something. But it's definitely an interesting rabbit hole to go through. But I also wanted to put this short into context for a lot of people who may not be aware. So picture this, it's the mid-1930s, and your entertainment options, of course you can go out and see a show, you could go out and see a movie in the local, we say cinema, you guys say theater or whatever, right? But if you're at home, you could read a book, you can play some board games, or you could listen to the radio. And radio was huge around that time. It was definitely as popular as something like streaming services are today. And at the time, there were a lot of variety type radio shows where there would just be comedy, you would have musical numbers, and a lot of those shows were recorded with a live audience, and you would have sing-along sequences and the audience would sing along. They would have a songbook, and sure enough, they would follow along. And this one is based off of a show, and Manny will go through the details in just a moment. But what's really interesting is that that show was only broadcast between 1936 and 1937, and this short came out in 1937. So not only is this about a time in history that's long forgotten, which is the whole family listening to the radio, but it's also of a show that just came and went so quickly.
So on the old blog, Likely Looney, Mostly Merry, written by Steve Hartley, this was an excellent blog that he was doing every single Warner Brothers short. He did stop at 1944, but maybe one day Steve will get back into doing this. It was an excellent blog. But he reviewed this cartoon, and his description of the obscurity of it sums it up best. So I quote, "My choice to revisit The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos is primarily based on my recent fascination of this early Frank Tashlin short itself. My interest isn't attributed to Tashlin's directorial style, but by its historical context. This short holds my nomination as arguably the most dated Warner Brothers cartoon ever. Not only have the references and gags grown dated by today's modern culture, but so has the cartoon's premise. The premise is largely a parody of the radio program Community Sing, broadcast on CBS from 1936 to 1937, and sponsored by the Gillette Razor Company. The show was built largely on comedy, but it also derived of a studio audience engaged in song fests. The program is notable as one of the earliest efforts of famed comedian Milton Berle. The cast included now forgotten radio performers like Wendell Hall, a young Eileen Barton, and Billy Jones and Ernie Hare," unquote. So yeah, if a kid sees this now, it's going to probably think, oh, look at all these cool animals, but there's so much history of old-time radio in it that if you're not a nerd like myself and the people who are listening to this, and Anthony and the gang and Steven, then yeah, there ain't going to be much for you to really glean from this one. But hey, I like it. I have a soft spot for it, so hey, it is what it is.
So right away, we hear an instrumental version of The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos, so I figure now is a good point for Manny to discuss the origins of this song.
So let's talk about the music of this one, shall we? So we start off, obviously, with the theme song, or the title song, I should say, The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos from 1937, which is coincidentally the same year as this cartoon. So The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos was written by J. Fred Coots and Charles Newman. This is the only recording of the song that really exists. Now, we don't even have a full version of it, and I can't find the sheet music for it. It would be great, maybe if someone can locate it, let me know, write a comment, email me, whatever, because I love getting a chance to look at these things. So obviously you hear it during the opening titles. It's sung later in the cartoon, 2 verses of it by Ernie Bear and Billy Goat, and I'll explain those parodies in a bit.
Come on! Everybody sing! Oh, the woods are full of cuckoos, cuckoos, cuckoos. The woods are full of cuckoos and my heart is full of love. Oh, the fields are full of daisies, crazy daisies. The fields are full of daisies and my heart is full of love.
And you also hear it in the background when Alexander Owlcott, a parody of Alexander Woolcott, does his little spiel in the beginning of the cartoon. This song is heard in a few other Warner Brothers cartoons. It was actually first heard in Porky's Building near the beginning of that cartoon, so another Tashlin short from the same year. Obviously, The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos is a cartoon. Porky at the Crocodero, another Tashlin cartoon, has it. You hear it in the background when you hear Porky's manager, the walrus with the German accent, speaking.
Betchy? You owe me 60 cents, Betchy. Goodbye, Betchy.
And you also hear it, I think, with the guy with the telegram, I betcha, that old dude. You hear that in the background as well. You hear it during the opening titles of the Chuck Jones cartoon Quentin Quayle. And it's also played in the Bob McKimson cartoon A Peck of Trouble. So let's talk a little bit about both of the songwriters of this cartoon. So I'm going to start with J. Fred Coots, and this information comes from the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And I quote, J. Fred Coots was a prolific songwriter. In the course of his long career, he wrote over 700 songs. John Frederick Coots was born in Brooklyn, New York on May 2nd, 1895, where he was taught to play the piano by his mother. After leaving high school, he got a job working in a bank on Wall Street. But in 1914, he heard a professional music plugger in a music shop selling new songs and decided to change careers. His first job in music was as a pianist and stock boy in a music shop, and by 1917, he had his first song published. He then went into vaudeville, playing the piano and writing songs tailored to specific performers, including Sophie Tucker, who, in this cartoon, is parodied as Sophie Turkey. So look at that little connection. I didn't even know that in real life, the guy who wrote this song and one of the characters parodied knew each other in real life. And I continue on, I quote, in 1922, he wrote the song for a Broadway show called Sally, Irene, and Mary, and then he would also compose music for many Broadway shows. And after his last Broadway score, a 1929 hit called Sons O' Guns, he left for New York to Hollywood. Now, his most famous piece of music is actually a Christmas song. So, that song is, You Better Watch Out, You Better Not Cry, You Better Not Pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He is the co-songwriter of that song. He actually wrote the melody for it. The lyrics were by Haven Gillespie, and the song was written in 1934. When it was covered by Eddie Cantor, who we never heard of that guy, and yeah, duh, obviously, and he's parodied in this cartoon as Eddie Gander. He's a goose, ha ha ha, hilarious. When it was covered by Eddie Cantor on his radio show in November of 1934, it became a hit. Within 24 hours, 500,000 copies of sheet music and more than 30,000 records were sold. That information I just told you comes from a book called Stories Behind the Greatest Hits of Christmas. And continuing on from the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and I quote, throughout his career, Coots wrote songs for the Cotton Club Reviews of 1936, 38, and 39, primarily working with lyricist Benny Davis. He also wrote children's songs for a recording by Rosemary Clooney. Coots continued to perform, first in vaudeville and later in nightclubs. He died in New York City on April 8th, 1985. So a few years before I was born. He had a pretty long life. About 90 years he lived. Almost 90. Now, Charles Newman, the co-songwriter of this song, barely any information about him. So all I found was he was born February 22nd, 1901 in Chicago, and he died January 9th, 1978 in Los Angeles. He was a songwriter. Yippee skippy. That's it. So that's for the title track.
Yeah, and try and look up Charles Newman, because that's not a widespread name at all, right? Even if you were to isolate the year. But anyway, if anyone does have a picture of him, I'd certainly like to know, but of course it'd be too late for this review. In any case, that was the title track. Now let's move on to the short itself, and we start off with Alexander Woolcott as Alcott, and he's also parodied in Have You Got Any Castles as the town crier, which was one of the roles he was known for at the time. He was a radio personality and drama critic for The New Yorker, among other things. So Mel Blanc does his voice, and in this short, most of the male voices are done by Mel Blanc. If I don't mention who voiced a male character, it's Mel Blanc. Everyone else, I will mention who's voiced who, and that's all based on Keith Scott's Wonderful Cartoon Voices book, where he knows most of the people voicing who, and if we don't know, I'll let you know that as well.
I hope that this elaborately attentive audience will stretch their esophagi to the fullest extent and burst forth with flowing, sweet melodies.
And I like the radio call sign. Of course, it's got to be KUKU, KUKU. Someone actually has pointed out somewhere, I forgot where I read this, but apparently that's a real radio station somewhere in the US, so that's kind of interesting, isn't it? But anyway.
And now, it pleases me extremely to have the honor of introducing your scintillating master of ceremony.
But it's interesting how the gags in the later part of this short get faster and faster, and yet this whole thing takes a whole minute with this Alcott going through what we're going to be seeing. So he's introducing the whole show. But it's amazing, once again, Tashlin playing with time, where in a lot of shorts, he will just start off things very slowly and then really pick up the pace towards the end.
So you hear a little bit of the song Shine On Harvest Moon, which was published in 1908. The music was by Nora Bayes. and the lyrics were by Jack Norworth. And you hear that music in the very beginning when you hear Ben Bernie, greetings and salutations, you guys and gals. I first heard that line when I was in middle school, and I just got fascinated with it. And I used to say greetings and salutations. I still do occasionally.
Greetings and salutations, you guys and gals. This is the old maestro with all the lads.
And in this bit, we see a parody of Ben Bernie as Ben Birdie, of course, and he was voiced here by Ted Pierce. And Walter Winchell, of course, it's got to be Walter Finchel, and he was a gossip columnist, and he's probably one of the more well-known figures in this short. But even then, he's probably obscure to a lot of people, but comparatively speaking, he's definitely one of the more well-known ones here. And you'll see some reused animation from the Coconut Grove, where you have Ben Birdie in that one as well. So this one is based off of a fake rivalry between the two, where it was basically a publicity stunt, but they were actually friends in real life. So, once again, something that's very obscure, that's been long forgotten by most people today.
So yeah, you hear Shine On Harvest Moon, how appropriate. Then later on, it cuts to Love is on the Air Tonight by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting. That song is from 1937. That's the music you hear when the parody of Walter Winchell, Walter Finchel, ha 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 ha, starts talking to Ben Birdie. I'll talk a little bit more about their rivalry and just how they were in real life when I get to the commentary for the Coconut Grove. I don't want to give away everything in this one.
Flash, what are you doing here, Ben Birdie? This isn't an amateur hour.
Dear, if it isn't my old palsy Walsy Walter. Yowza, it all goes to show that all cuckoos aren't in clocks. No. Now, from the ridiculous to the sublime, and back again. Introducing that celebrated radio star, that boisterous buffoon, that incomparable purveyor of puns and piffle.
So, the song itself, Love is on the Air Tonight, was originally from the 1937 film Varsity Show, which starred Dick Powell and Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians. If you want to know more about Fred Waring, check out the commentary I did for Young and Healthy, because that guy, he was a Renaissance man. He did a lot. And speaking of Varsity Show, that same film features several songs that would be used in later Tashlin shorts, as well as just songs that Carl Stalling used a lot. For example, the song Old King Cole, We're Working Our Way Through College, Have You Got Any Castles, Let That Be a Lesson to You, and Sing You Son of a Gun. So those 5 songs Carl Stalling would use in the future. Pretty neat.
So now we see Milton Berle, of course, who's a squirrel, right? In any case. And we see Polly, who is a caricature of Little Jolly Gillette, and on the radio she was played by Eileen Barton. And Keith Scott's not sure who voices her in this one. So the idea here is that Jolly Gillette is like the daughter of the sponsor of the show, Community Sync Gillette, which is the razor corporation that's still around today. And that's why there's that line, my daddy says you gotta let me sing because he's the sponsor. So that's where all that comes from. Did I mention that this was very obscure?
Then we hear a little bit of 'Cause My Baby Says It's So, which is by Harry Warren and Al Dubin, the McCartney and Lennon of their day. And that's the song that you hear in the background when Milton Squirrel is talking to Polly. Now, I know Anthony probably already mentioned in his commentary, but Milton Squirrel is a parody of the comedian Milton Berle, and I actually knew who Milton Berle was before this commentary. He had a very long career. This was when he was relatively new to show business. If you want to know more information about Harry Warren, check out the commentary I did for A Great Big Bunch of You, and for Al Dubin, The Girl at the Ironing Board. Give those commentaries some love.
This is your squirrel friend, Milton. I sure hope you folks have...
Hello, Mr. Squirrel.
Golly, if it isn't Polly.
My daddy says you gotta let me sing 'cause he's a sponsor.
Oh, sure you can. And everybody else will sing with that red-headed music maker, Wendell Hall.
And then you see a scene involving a parody of Wendell Hall, and Manny will go through who he is in just a moment, as he was a musical star at the time, but he's hosting the audience with a songbook, and again, as I mentioned before, these sort of sing-alongs were very common in a lot of recordings for those radio shows. So you'd have the audience, they'd have the songbook, and it's like, okay, turn to this page, and we're going to sing such and such song. So of course, this is making fun of that, and this is one of my favorite scenes in this, probably my favorite, maybe second favorite, I'm not sure. But I do get a kick out of this where it's like, oh, we don't need the book. And then they just throw the books I thought this was pretty funny.
We hear Are You From Dixie, which is from 1916, which was written by George Linus Cobb and Jack Yeller. That's the music that you hear when Wendell Hall is trying to lead the crowd in the sing-along. I just love this part. I've always liked it. Mel Blanc putting on his southern accent when he's fumbling around trying to find the pages in the songbook.
Open your songbooks to page 22. No, page 44. No, page 28, 42, 36, 45, 23, 16, 18, 5, 14, 81, 73. Oh, never mind. We won't use the books.
Oh, yes, we will.
Story of my life, you know. So I'm like, hey, what page is it? Well, now when I sing, I put my music on an iPad, so it's a lot easier to, you know, hopefully nobody's throwing books at me, especially like those really heavy hymnals. Whenever I sing in a church, I don't want to get pelted in the head with one of them. I was going to go a little bit into depth about Wendell Hall, not Wendell Howell, Wendell Hall. That's the guy's real name. But I'm going to keep it short because, again, this commentary is already going to be ridiculously long. And I don't want Anthony to throw a songbook from Australia all the way to the United States and pelt me in the head for some reason. So, a little bit about Wendell Hall. Wendell Woods Hall, he was born August 23rd, 1896 in St. George, Kansas. He died April 2nd, 1969 in Fairhope, Alabama. He was a country singer, vaudeville star, a songwriter. He was a radio performer, obviously. That's why he was on here. He recorded on records, and he helped make the ukulele very popular. I know when I was doing research about him on the All Music website, they were saying that Wendell Hall was to the ukulele like Les Paul was to the electric guitar, helped him make it popular and so on and so forth. But these are things that are lost to time. He did help popularize the ukulele, and he even had a ukulele method book published during his time because of how popular he made that instrument. His nickname was the Red-Headed Music Maker, so that's why that's said in the cartoon. So that was, yeah, the Red-Headed Music Maker and the Pineapple Picador. Yeah, very strange nicknames for him, but hey, I wasn't alive back in the 1920s and so on and so forth. Yep, the Red-Headed Music Maker and the Pineapple Picador. I love pineapples. That's one of my favorite fruits. Anywho, let's move on.
And now on to the next bit, which again, Manny will go into more in depth as they have a strong association with music. But we see Billy Goat and Ernie Bear. Of course, it's Billy Jones and Ernie Hare. And Manny has the same observation, but they didn't go with the obvious rabbit pun for Ernie. That's kind of weird, but okay, sure. I guess at least he did something different here. We actually don't know who recorded the voices on this one. There's no information on that in Keith Scott's book. And before I turn you over to Manny to discuss these two gentlemen, that song that's being sung at first, that's pretty much me and Manny, how our recordings sound like before I go in and edit everything.
Oh, how do you do and how are you? Oh, how do you do and how are you? Oh, how do you do?
So the next song that you hear is called On the Rue de la Paix. Hopefully my French is not terrible. By Werner Heyman and Ted Koehler. That is the melody of the song that Billy Goat and Ernie Bear sing. So, and how do you do, and how are you, and how do you do, and how are you? So the Rue de la Paix is a street in Paris, France, and it translates, Rue means street, de la Paix, I probably said it wrong, de la Paix means of the peace, Peace Street, okay? So she lives on Peace Street. No, that's Love Street by The Doors, my favorite band, and that's going into the 60s. We're not going to do that now, though. So, yeah, when I was looking at the cue sheet, I was like, I don't hear the song, and then I realized, oh, that's the melody of what Billy Goat and Ernie Bear were singing. So, I'm going to give you some information about these two guys, because they were pretty big on radio during that time, and I figured to give them a little spotlight since Ernie Bear and Billy Goat sing the title song in this cartoon. So who were they? And this information I got comes from a website called Travelanche, and I got some other places, but here we go. And I quote, "The Happiness Boys were Thomas Ernest Ernie Hare. He was born March 16th, 1883 in Norfolk, Virginia. He died March 9th, 1939 in New York City." So he was born a few days after my birthday, and he died the day before my birthday, because I was born March 10th. And William Reese Billy Jones. He was born March 15th, 1889 in New York City. and he died November 23rd, 1940 in New York City. Ernie Hare was the baritone of the duo, and Jones was the tenor. So I'm a tenor myself. Tenor's the higher part of the two. Baritone's the lower part. So Billy Jones, Billy Goat, Billy Jones, tenor, and Ernie Hare, Ernie Bear, was the baritone. What's kind of funny is his last name is Hare, like hare, like the animal that's related to the rabbit, hair remover, hair trigger, all the Bugs Bunny puns. I'm surprised that they didn't just say, yeah, his last name literally is the name of an animal. Why don't we just make him into the animal that his last name is? But hey, Frank Tashlin hasn't been around since the 70s, so I can't ask him. And if I saw him back then, he would be like, I don't even remember what was going behind it. So let me continue on with this article. And I quote, Hare was the more seasoned professional of the two singers. At age 16, he went on Broadway, and he started working as a recording artist shortly after. From 1919 through 1920, he was understudied by Al Jolson. And Al Jolson is parodied in this cartoon as Al Goatson, the singing kid. Get it, kid? There's another name for a young goat, sheep. Never mind. Al Jolson, of course, I could go on and on about him, but I'm going to save that. Probably when I get to I Love the Singer, I'm going to definitely go all out on Al Jolson. Not Al Goatson, not Al Jolson. Al Jolson, very famous singer, obviously, if you know your Warner Brothers history. Continuing on with the article, and I quote, in 1919, Hare teamed up with Billy Jones, who had previously sung with the Crescent Trio, the Harmonizers Quartet, the Premier Quartet, and the Cleartone Four. As was the custom of the day, both men had sung under several aliases, depending on the label and the context. In 1920, the pair began recording as a duo on Brunswick and Edison Records, as well as other labels. In 1921, they got on a local radio station, the call sign being WJZ in Newark, New Jersey, which is very close to where I live, and one of the biggest airports in the country, Newark International Airport. And I did a little digging. I'm like, wait a minute, it still exists. I was surprised, but now it's under a new call signal. It's been for years WABC, so I know WABC. It is now a political talk station, blah, 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 politics, blah, blah, blah station that still exists. Many years ago was the original home of Billy Jones and Ernie Hare. Kind of neat. All right, so continuing on, and I quote, in 1923, they moved to WAEF in New York, sponsored by the Happiness Candy Stores, and they got their nickname, the Happiness Boys. How Do You Do was their theme song, which was recorded in 1924 on Edison Records. That's why they kept repeating, how do you do and how are you in this cartoon, even though it's not the same song called How Do You Do, which they were famous for. They sang the popular hits of the day and filled the remaining time with jokes and funny repartee. The show went national on NBC in 1926. By 1928, they were the highest paid performers in radio. In 1930, they made a Vitaphone short, Rambling Round Radio Row. Say that 5 times fast. That was also the year of their last record. Some thought constant radio exposure hurt their record sales. The pair were off national radio by 1932. In the 1933-1934 season, they had a local show sponsored by the Tasty Bread Company. Bread. Continuing on. They were billed as the Tasty Loafers. Then in 1936, they returned to national radio with a show called the Community Sing Program on CBS. So look at that. They were actually on the show that this cartoon is parodying. It all makes sense. And they were billed as the Gillette Gentlemen, sponsored by the Razor Company. The Gillette Gentlemen. I like that. Everything has to rhyme. Toonie Tenor, Gillette Gentlemen. Now, they continued on with the show, but sadly, Ernie Hare got sick and eventually he died in 1939. During that time period when he was sick and then when he passed away, Billy Jones would sing with Ernie Hare's 16-year-old daughter, Marilyn. So they would rebuild, they would rename their act as Jones and Hare. It's commendable that his daughter helped her father out in that way. So look at that. All that information you just learned about a bear and a goat, but it was actually 2 real singers. And I was listening to some of their songs, especially How Do You Do? It's very repetitive. The melody, I don't know where, I forgot the name of the melody of the song itself. It's like an older melody and they just add their word to it. How do you do and how are you do? No, now I'm singing the one from the cartoon. Anyway, go check it out. It's on YouTube. It's pretty neat.
And now we get to the title song itself. And not only did they do this sort of thing for live audiences for radio, it was also the sort of thing that they would do in the theater where they would have the lyrics on the screen, and everyone in the crowd would sing along. And if you watch Friz Freeling's She Was an Acrobat's Daughter, that's probably a good example right there. So I like in this scene where, I'm presuming to save costs and time and effort and whatever, Tashlin would just draw one half and then flip it over to the other side so it makes it look like it's a full audience, and Friz Freeling would do that quite a bit. But I like how Tashlin added that extra little touch where he would colour differently certain animals on each side, so while it's a mirror image, it still looks different because he's coloured in the different animals. So I thought that was a nice touch. I thought that was very clever of him. It's not like you see those bits for too long anyway. You would only really notice if you pause, so it does the job. That's what I'm trying to say. We see a scene where a fox sings the wrong song next to the rabbit, and Maddie will let you guys know what song that is. So it's a nice little scene here, and the rabbit is a play on the comedian Portland Hoffer, and the fox is Fred Allen, who was also a comedian, and the two were actually married in real life. Keith Scott's not sure on the voice of the rabbit here. So, again, it's another obscure little detail from a long-forgotten comedian couple.
So, while they are doing the sing-along in the cartoon, you see a brief scene of a caricature of Fred Allen, and he starts singing Old Folks at Home from 1851. Old Folks at Home, written by Steve Foster, is also known as Swanee River because it starts way the Swanee River. And then, of course, hearing Mel Blanc screaming, "Why don't somebody tell me these things?" makes me laugh all the time. A lot of baggage with Stephen Foster's music. A lot of his music is tied to minstrelsy, but if you want to learn more, and if you're willing to stomach the cartoon itself, I did go into detail about Stephen Foster in the commentary for Hitting the Trail for Hallelujah Land.
Way down upon the Swanee River.
Oh, Mr. Allen,
Yes?
you're singing the wrong song.
Why don't somebody tell me these things?
So check that out. And during that whole scene, you see the theme song is being sung by a bunch of parodies of different actors and singers. And I know Anthony's probably going to talk about it, but Sophie Tucker was a singer. Dick Powell, tons of cartoons. He was very popular in Warner Brothers films at the time, and a lot of the songs that Warner Brothers cartoons used were sung by Dick Powell in the films. Fats Waller, a very famous jazz piano player that was parodied as Fat Swallow. Dick Powell was Dick Fowl. Sophie Tucker was Sophie Turkey. You have Bing Crosby. Ha 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 ha. I'll talk more about Bing Crosby when I get to Bingo Crosby. And I mentioned before Al Jolson as Al Goatson. Ruby Keeler, another actress that appeared often with Dick Powell, is Ruby Squealer. Come on. Anthony's probably saying, man, I wish I was alive to be working on these puns. And then you have Lanny Moss, who I don't know. I didn't do much digging on him, so I'll let Anthony take care of that part, since I'm already rambling enough as it is. So moving on.
Gee, thanks, man. You're going to give me all the hard work, right? All right, so we got a whole bunch of references here. And once again, I'm not going to go too in-depth because this will just take forever if I did. So let's go through them from left to right as we pan along this scene as all these celebrities sing the title song. All right, first up, Eddie Gander is Eddie Cantor, voiced by Cliff Nazaro. Then we see Sophie Turkey as Sophie Tucker. We're not sure on the voice here, but she was a comedian and singer at the time. W.C. Fieldmouse as W.C. Fields. He was a movie star and comedian and probably one of the more well-known figures in this short. Dick Powell, Maddie already mentioned him, movie star for Warner's at the time, along with Fats Swallow as Fats Waller, which Maddie already mentioned. He was a jazz pianist. Deanna Terrapin is Deanna Turpin. Not sure on the voice, but this one's more interesting. She was a child actress at the time. She was actually very successful, made a ton of money. And then after she was around 28 or so, she just left the industry entirely, became very reclusive, and gave only one interview. So definitely look that one up. She was definitely interesting how you would have someone that would be so famous and then boom, just like disappearing off the face of the earth. Irvin S. Frog is Irvin S. Cobb, who was an American author and humorist. Fred McFurry, so I guess this is the origin of the furries, I don't know, but anyway. So Fred McMurray, an actor, But you might be more familiar with Fred MacMurray, as he had a bit of a second wind in terms of his career in the 70s, doing all those Disney movies that came around, all those really safe movies that they did before they got revitalized in the 80s. Bing Crosby, voiced by Cliff Nazaro here, famous crooner, of course, in a lot of Warner Brothers shorts. Al Jolson, already mentioned by Manny, here is voiced by Dave Webber, singer and actor, of course. Ruby Keeler, ha ha, I got a laugh as well, just like what Manny did, an actress and singer. Lenny Hoss is Lanny Ross, who was a musician, and we get a little opera fight, I guess, is maybe what we can call it. But we have Grace Moore, and we have Lily Pons, and they were both opera singers, hence why this scene would make sense with them trying to outdo each other. But putting aside all of the caricatures here, it's a very impressive sequence on a technical level because it's such a long pan, and that's not exactly that easy to do in animated films. Not impossible, of course, but it's very impressive because not only do you get a pan from left to right, but then you got another pan from down to up once they do that whole opera battle of sorts towards the end, and it's timed very well to the different notes being done as the necks are going higher and higher and higher. It's very, very impressive. And, of course, the next bit, chef's kiss to this part, Birdie mentions the high C. Why is Birdie like the high seas? Because he is all wet.
Why is Birdie like the high seas? Because he's all wet.
Yowza, ladies and gentlemen, all's wet that ends wet.
Beautiful.
Then you hear the song Rocked in the Cradle of the Deep, which was written in 1840 by Joseph Philip Knight and Emma Hart Willard. That's the song that you hear in the background when Ben Birdie is making the high seas pun. And I know Anthony will appreciate that. It's a great dad joke. And he says that after the vocal duel between Grace Moose and Lily Swans. And Grace Moore and Lily Swans were actual singers. And I actually heard of Lily Pons in the past. I've heard recordings of her. She was an opera singer. Actually, both of them were. Grace Moore and Lily Pons, I keep wanting to say Swans, they were both operatic sopranos. They sang like that in real life. Grace Moore was called the Tennessee Nightingale, and she also had a career in film as well. She sadly died young in 1947. She was only 40 as she died in a plane crash. And Lily Pons, she made herself a little bit more famous outside of the opera world. One of the articles I read said that she was like how one of my favorite opera singers, Luciano Pavarotti, how Pavarotti had crossover appeal. He sang with non-opera singers. He was in a film. And Lily Pons was kind of in the same vein, that they had careers outside of the opera world, because the opera world is it's an interesting place. Trust me, I know. And I think it's pretty funny that when Ben Birdie makes the high C joke, as in like waves in the ocean, but the last two notes that Grace Moose and Lily Swan sing are the notes E and C. I don't know which one does the high E. I think it was Grace Moose. They go, la, la. Those two notes are E and C. I'm not going to sing it that high because I can't sing as high as them. That was like 2 octaves lower than the two notes you actually hear in a cartoon.
I know I've mentioned obscurity millions of times in this review already, but this one could be the king of them all. So we see Raven McQuandary. That's a reference to radio performer Haven McQuarrie, and he hosted and produced quite a few radio quiz shows, and this one is a parody of a radio show called So Do You Want to Be an Actor? So he poses that question to the audience, and they all yell out, "No!" I gotta say, this made me laugh a lot. I know some people didn't like it, but I just love the look of the Raven when he's like, "What? You don't?" At the very end of that. I thought it was funny. Between this and the earlier scene I mentioned that I also liked, yeah, I guess it's a tie between the two being my favorite bits in this short.
And in that scene, you hear briefly a little bit of the overture to The Poet and the Peasant by Franz von Suppe. If you want to know about von Suppe, I get into detail about him because you do hear the Poet and the Peasant Overture a lot in animation in Warner Brothers shorts. Check out the commentary I did for Shake Your Powder Puff. Now, when Raven McQuandary, again, he's a parody of the real-life person Haven McQuarrie, Do You Want to Be an Actor was a radio amateur show of the same name that was on NBC Radio on Sunday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. And like I mentioned earlier, when Steve Hartley said that's probably one of the most obscure references in Warner Brothers cartoons ever. Because, yeah, I didn't even know that until doing research for this.
Do you want to be an actor?
No!
You then see Joe Penguin, who's a parody of Joe Penner, who was an actor and comedian who died rather young, actually, at 36. I didn't even know that. And he was the basis of Egghead, the character that would somewhat evolve into Elmer. So the animations reused from My Green Fedora, and they even sing it here.
Written by Al Lewis, Joseph Meyer, and Al Sherman.
Although it's not a child singer this time around, it's actually sung by Dave Weber.
I'm wearing my green fedora. Fedora, not Alice, not Annie, not Daisy, but Fedora.
Then you see the Martha Bray, the horse, who's a parody of the singer Martha Ray, and she's singing a song, How Could You, from 1936, another Warren and Dubin composition. I could go into more detail about Martha Ray, but again, this is going on super long. Her nickname was the Big Mouth, and obviously at the end of her scene, her mouth swallows the camera. Kind of reminds me of the old harmonizing days where they did that a lot, and I know that that was also done in some of the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons because those animators worked on those cartoons prior to starting the Warner Brothers studio. And that part near the end of the song, when she's scatting, la da 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 da, and then the trumpet responds with the same thing, the muted trumpet. I've always loved that part. I think it's so neat.
I was looking forward to all those little things you didn't do. How could you break my la da 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 da? Let it go, let it ride, yeah, man.
So the next bit's quite interesting. It's a parody of Tizzy Lish, a fictional character from the Al Pierce show, played by Bill Comstock. And it's like a nutty health expert cooker, and the catchphrase, hello folksies, is parodied here and done by Ted Pierce. And the impersonation is quite good. I actually went back and listened to some of the original recordings for this because I was really curious about it. And sure enough, it's really, really good. And my favorite bit, you must eat the iron so you have iron in your system. So many little puns here. Absolutely love it.
Hello, folksies. Today we will make a delicious wiffle. Now put in 4 cups of flour. Put the cups in 2. Add sugar, milk, lard. Mix them up. Are you mixing? My friends say I'm a good mixer. Are you? Or aren't you? Now add 5 duck eggs. Isn't that ducky?
Where you see Tizzy Fish, you hear the song in the background called The Lady Who Couldn't Be Kissed, another Harry Warren and Al Dubin composition. So that song was used in the 1937 film The Singing Marine, another film with Dick Powell in it. And like I said, this is the music that you hear when Tizzy Fish is making her meal with the duck eggs and all the puns she's making. And chef's kiss, Anthony would love it. Throw some duck eggs. Are you feeling ducky? And then when she's like, as my doctor said, I'm going to leave you all in stitches. That line kills me every time. You briefly hear a little bit of The Lady in Red by Mort Dixon and Ali Rubel. I've spoken about Dixon and Rubel before, and the cartoon, The Lady in Red, that uses the same song, so I'll go more into detail about that song and the songwriters in that one. So that, you hear the melody is hummed by Tizzy Fish. So she goes, when she's waiting for her stuff to settle and all that.
Or is it? Now put it in the iron and let it bake. Are you baking? I'll wait. Now take the wiffle out and eat the iron. You must have iron in your system. Or should you? Now I'll leave you as my doctor friend does. In stitches.
And now we go on to another radio parody, and this time we see Luella Parsons, who's parodied as Luella Possums, and she was hosting the radio program Hollywood Hotel, and that had guest stars dramatizing scenes from their upcoming films. Of course, here it's hollow wood. Get it? Because she's on a hollow piece of wood. But anyway, So she was basically a gossip columnist, and she would talk with various actors at the time.
You also hear the lady who couldn't be kissed during the scenes where you have Luella Parsons speaking.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my guest stars, Jack Bunny.
Hello again, folks.
Canary Livingston. Hello, folks. And Andy Bovine.
Hello, folks!
Who will present scenes from the Warmer Brothers picture, The Prodigal's Return. A little music, Ben, to get us in the...
Now you hear briefly a little bit of "She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes, she'll be coming around." Every time I hear that song, the first cartoon I think of is 1939's Hammockshire Night from Tex Avery, when Elmer Fudd, yes, that's technically Elmer Fudd, an early version of him. You know, let's just say Egghead. I'm not going to get into it in this commentary. It's a whole big thing. The big nose guy with the bowler derby, call him whatever you want, but he keeps singing that and he keeps being pulled away during the amateur hour. And I always think of that cartoon instantly when I hear this song.
Hello, folks. Tonight is amateur night. Next we have...
She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes along. Yeah, she'll be coming round the mountain when she...
Next.
So "She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain" in this cartoon is the music that you hear when Ben Birdie's conducting just before they get to the skit. With the characters, which are Jack Bunny, Canary Livingstone. Sorry. Is it Livingston or Livingstone? Canary Livingstone. It says Livingstone. I'll say Livingstone. I'm probably wrong. Canary Livingstone and Andy Bovine. And it's funny, like when I was looking at the cue sheet, I'm like, wait a minute, she'll be coming around the mountains in this cartoon? And doing the rewatch, I didn't even realize that's what, Ben Birdie was conducting. I guess because the arrangement was kind of different than what I'm used to. I mean, it's a cool arrangement from Carl Stalling. But you hear it for a few seconds, and then it goes into the skit.
And the next skit, as Manny already mentions, has Jack Bunny, so Jack Bunny, and Canary Livingston is a parody of Mary Livingston, who was his wife, and Andy Devine, and he was a regular cast member on the Jack Benny program, so that makes sense why the three of them are together. Now, okay, we've seen the Jack Bunny thing many times, and the Jack Benny voice, by the way, is done by Ted Pierce, and Dave Weber does the voice of Andy Bovine. I love that bit. I just love his reaction to the whole "Hi, Ma" thing that's gone for here. And we see a so-called preview of a Warmer Brothers feature. We've seen that a few times before, where it's The Prodigal's Return. And I couldn't really find any reference to that, if that was based on some sort of movie that was going to come out or something. So if you know what that parody is, definitely let me know in the comments.
My boy.
Howdy, son.
Howdy, Ma! Hi, Pa!
So this is another bit I love. The whole "Howdy, Ma, hi, Pa," and the voice just shakes down the house, and then boom, we just cut straight away to the next thing. It's fantastic.
Andy Devon was famous for having a very high and raspy voice. There's the cartoon My Little Buckaroo, which I'll be getting to in the future, that the pig in that cartoon, his voice is a parody of Andy Devon, or Devine.
Close your sleepy eyes, my little buckaroo, while the light of western skies is shining down on you. Now it's time that you were rounding up a dream or two. So go to sleep, my little buckaroo.
And this part makes me laugh every time I see it, because when he goes, "Hello, folks," kills me. And then when he goes, "Hey, Paul." Oh, the first time I saw that when I was a teenager, I couldn't stop laughing at how ridiculous it was. It's the delivery, just the absurdity of the whole thing. So, chef's kiss. I love it.
And then we finish up once again with Alexander Alcott as the town crier, and he says, all is well, which was another trademark saying of his from the radio show, and the end.
And the last cue that you hear in this cartoon is "Here Comes the Sandman" from 1937, another Warren and Dubin composition. This is the music after you see the skit with Jack Bunny and his co-stars. And you hear this start playing briefly when Luella Parsons is talking, and then when Alexander Alcott is saying good night. Good night. That song comes from the film Mr. Dodd Takes the Air, which is also from 1937. So, those are my thoughts for The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos. I like this cartoon. I've always had a soft spot for it. It's super obscure. It's just a bunch of silly animals doing silly things, but once you dig more into it, like I said, you learn a ton of stuff about old-time radio. I got to listen to a little bit of them. Some of these celebrities I knew, some of them I didn't. It was a really fun deep dive. It just took forever to do. Sorry, Anthony. Don't get mad. Nah, he's a cool guy. Like I said, I just got to make sure that I don't have a songbook flying and hitting me in the head from Australia. It's going to be like a boomerang book. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all the support. Please follow me on the Toonie Tenor in my social media accounts, TheTooneyTenor, for my updates on my life as a musician, as a classically trained singer, as well as a multifaceted nerd. I always love coming on to record these. The musicologist in me gets intrigued. And it was neat, jumping ahead in the timeline and seeing this cartoon that I have a bit of a soft spot for.
And finally, before I give my final thoughts, my good friend Austin Kelly, the self-proclaimed Tashlin-holic, is going to give just some brief thoughts on this short, as he's done on all the Frank Tashlin shorts, and we want to keep that record going, so he's on all of them. So, take it away, Austin.
Howdy, you all. Austin Kelly here to talk about a great cartoon by a great director, Frank Tashlin, doing Woods Are Full of Cuckoos from 1937. You know, a lot of people ignore this cartoon and the ones that surround it. If anyone talks about Frank Tashlin at Warner's, they usually talk about his later stint as a director in the 1940s. If they ever talk about his 30s films, they usually talk about the Porky Pig cartoons. And if they ever dare bring up his 30s color one-shots, they never bring up any of his fun little musicals like this and his Book Comes to Life trilogy. Little do they know the fun they're missing, man. I mean, Tashlin took heavy influence on these early color merry melodies from the guys before him who made tons of these kinds of cartoons, like Harmon and Ising and the great Friz Freleng. A lot of these cartoons get blurred together in people's minds because they all feel the same. And that's true to an extent, but regardless of how they feel, each one brings a truly different and unique viewing experience to the table. And that's something I love about these fun films. Tashlin was a great admirer of those who came before him in the color musical realm, calling Freleng's films really beautifully engineered things, and claiming that all he did in his new musicals was crib ideas from Harmon and Ising. But is that really the case? It's true to an extent that these Tashlin cartoons feel less Tashlin-esque than the others that surround them. Maybe that's part of why people turn away from them. But it's exciting to see how the older generation of Harmon and Ising type humor got mixed with Tashlin's new way of comedy and quick cutting. It's truly a joy to see these worlds collide as Tashlin combines these musical frameworks with his fast-paced, ahead of its time cutting and timing. For that reason alone, The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos is worth a watch. But I will admit, of course, that it is a bit less interesting than Tashlin's other 30s films, not forgetting the Porky Pig cartoons and including the Books Come to Life trilogy in that count, which didn't tie itself down with non-stop celebrity caricatures and Alexander Woolcott MCs, although actually his other musicals, some of them at least, did have both of those things, but they were toned down much more than they were in this cartoon. Still, though, it is nice to see Tashlin taking inspiration from those who came before him and crafting a neat cartoon that shows a key development point in the Warner world, mixing newer, faster, funnier ways of cartoon making with the charm, beauty, and grace of the older musicals. Until next time, I am Austin Kelly, and Frank Tashlin is awesome.
So after all that, what do I think about this short? It's honestly more interesting as a curiosity. I don't think it's the funniest. It definitely has some funny moments in it. It's got some interesting character designs, even if you don't know what the parodies actually are, but it's not a go-to one for me, I will say. I think Tashlin's actually made better shorts, and this one probably would have resonated more with people at that time period who were aware of all the references. But it's a nice one. This one gets, 8 out of 10. It's okay. And again, it's not one that I revisit very often in Tashlin's filmography, but it's still worth watching nonetheless.
So thanks for listening, and I don't know, I guess I gotta sing like Billy Goat. So how do you do and how are you? Or, so we're saying goodbye. Never mind. I'm not very good at coming up with lyrics on the spot. Sometimes, just not right now. All right, folks. That's all, folks. See you later.
And that will do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
Good night. Good night. The woodland community swing peacefully terminates. All is well. All is well.